Did you know that sex isn't supposed to ruin your mental health, and that part of the reason that it does, the overwhelming reason that it does, is because we as a culture and society don't have conversations on consent or healthy relationships or healthy sexual relationships? We don't do the work. We add all this stigma, and then we're like, people's mental health gets ruined. Yeah, we didn't build anything that resembles a support network. Personal moment, but I remember as a young adult when I lost my virginity, I did everything quote unquote right. I was with a partner that I absolutely adored. We were safe and careful and gentle. Everything was good. And I cried like a baby at the end. You know why? Because I felt like I wasn't special anymore. And I was an adult at that point in time, and yet it still had a negative impact on me. But it's because of society and other people. It's not because the act itself was bad. And in fact, the act itself, whether it be for your first time or any time, might not be so bad and traumatizing if we talked about, what feels good for both parties or what aftercare looks like or how to have conversations, that are a little uncomfortable and awkward with your partner. And this is especially true for minors who don't have a fully developed frontal lobe and are experiencing these feelings for the first time. But a lot of that stems from the fact that we just don't equip them or support them. We shame them. We say, oh, but you're a kid. You shouldn't be thinking this. You shouldn't be feeling this. So no. And then we just make them feel bad. And then their mental health tanks when they do it anyway, as they're likely to do. Again, I'm not saying that we have to support or encourage intimacy for minors, but instead of shaming them and stigmatizing them and making it seem like this dirty, gross thing, and then being surprised when it impacts their mental health, why don't we do the labor of acknowledging the scenario that we're in, the reality of the situation, and what we need to do, not just for minors, but for people in general, to be able to have these healthy, intimate interactions with each other. As opposed to just being like, it's science that it can hurt. Yeah, but what if it didn't? What if we didn't let it hurt? What if we worked a little bit harder? All right, for all my facts and stats people, let's talk about why it is that teenagers, yes, minors, do need comprehensive X education. For starters, this does not mean encouraging teens to be intimately active. They are not prepared for the impact that will have on their relationships with each other, on their bodies, or the way that it might hinder their opportunities for self-development in the future, because they're just not equipped for that. That's not the stage of life that they're in. But it doesn't mean that they don't understand, because while they might be children under the eyes of the law so that they can be protected and not exploited, they're not actually children. In fact, John Hopkins calls the teenage years adolescence, which is 13 to 18 when they're undergoing growth spurts and puberty. Their bodies and their brains are changing. So they might be children under the law, but they're not little kids. Their brains are equipped to handle this much information and this much decision making. We just don't equip them. In fact, while there is a connection between having a low self-esteem and experiencing depression and being, X active, it doesn't mean that because they are X active, they will be depressed. It is more likely because of the stigma that we placed on them. So if you take the stigma away and the shame, you take away a lot of the mental health part. In fact, according to the Canadian Institute of Health Research, we consider casual intimate relationship to be bad for minors, but there's no data supporting that. We just think that it is. In fact, the research that they did show that these casual relationships had a negative impact on self-esteem and self-worth and risky behaviors, but almost exclusively in girls, highlighting the fact that the issue is with the stigma associated with being intimate, because we don't have that same stigma for boys. So what do we do about it? According to the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, we have comprehensive X Ed programs, which are community oriented, not just asking your mom and dad and then those 2 weeks in school, but is a community effort, leads to a decrease in risky sexual activity, all sexual activities, spreading of STDs and STIs, and unwanted pregnancy. And in fact, according to the Journal of X Research, having high psychosocial competency, as in being able to maintain interpersonal relationships and have a high self-esteem, is correlated to a higher mental health surrounding sexual activities, being able to stand up for yourself when it comes to being sexually intimate, and a decrease in generally risky X behaviors. Which means that all in all, educating the youth, even though they're minors, is an overwhelmingly good thing. And in fact, there's no research to support the fact that because we told them about it, it means they go out and do it. In fact, the research says the opposite. The more they know, the less they do. So it's not that minors have brains that are just so poorly equipped to talk about X. It's that we're not equipping them to be able to talk about it and handle it in a healthy way. So they go out, they feel their hormones and their feelings, they make choices based on that, also in the cloud of stigma and shame, and then they come out the way they come out and we're like surprised by it. It's weird. And the exact opposite of what we should be doing. Y'all do know that single moms want and love their kids, right? That we're not just out here getting knocked up and having his baby. That's our baby too. That's actually our baby. Like, pregnancy is not just some condition that just falls upon us. We are equal part creator and final decision maker in the process. Like, maybe I'm just more attuned to it now, or there's an influx in it. But I see a lot of content lately that's like, oh, y'all gotta stop having these men's babies. Y'all gotta stop having these losers' babies. That's my baby. That's my kid that I wanted. Like, we talk about pregnancy and by extension X as this thing that just falls upon women, that just happens to them, like they're victims in the scenario. And sometimes they are, but oftentimes we are knowledgeable, consenting participants and stewardesses of our own futures. Like, what? Like, even if the pregnancy is unplanned, even if the relationship doesn't work out, it's not that we are victims who are just having his baby. We are independent, autonomous adult decision makers who decided we wanted our children. And even if people want to complain about their baby daddy and y'all want to come back with the whole, well, you knew he was awful, you should have picked better, blah, 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 mayhaps. But the complaint is that this other adult, autonomous decision maker made a choice and then is not upholding their end of the bargain, and they're not being a good person about it. That's the issue, is that they're not being good people. And you too have an issue with that. It's just that you have this stigma against single women and single moms. This is not true for everyone, but for many of us, having a kid is not just some unfortunate scenario we found ourselves fallen into or trapped in. We thought about it. We made decisions. We weighed pros and cons and decided that the child we wanted is not his baby. It's mine. That's my kid that I love and want and care for. I am not a victim in this situation. Not that way, anyway. Y'all gotta stop taking women's autonomy away in pregnancy and by proxy in sex, because it's getting really weird. Like, really weird. Okay, there are a few things about this whole why have a baby with a loser rhetoric that we need to unpack. Number one, it's not about having a baby with a loser or having that loser's baby. I am having the baby I wanted. Y'all have got to stop centering men in these conversations. Yet that, yes, that man is technically the father, should be the partner. But more than anything, it's not having a baby with him or his baby. Mine, my choices, my life, my body, about me. Stop thinking about him. Stop. We always say we need to decenter men. This is a good place to start. Stop centering every choice a woman makes, especially about her body and her future, around the existence of a man. Quit. But number two, and also worth noting, is that yes, that man is a loser. Yes, it might be obvious to you, but there is something in there that made her love him. You know, like, we're not just falling in love with him when he shows all his red flags on the first date. That is somebody that 9 times out of 10 put on a really good show. You fall in love with that show. You fall in love with that version of them. And then they change and you spend a while trying to get them back. It takes a minute to unlearn that person, unromanticize that version of them that exists in your head and that life that you might have wanted for yourself. And we all like to say and pretend like we can just snap our fingers and magically be like, oh no, baby, I leave after the first red flag. But 99% of the time, we don't. And yes, you cannot rely on your friends to pick up the pieces every single time, especially if those pieces are broken more than like twice. That's just not fair. And yes, you do eventually need to learn that that version of them just isn't real, and the version that's real is the one that's treating you poorly. But we also need to accept the fact that, you know, that is a very human experience and that grace should be given. But more than anything, stop centering why have a baby with a loser around the loser and accept the fact that these women, these generally intelligent, decent decision-making women, decided that with or without him, they wanted their kid and then made a choice independent of that man for their own bodies and their own lives. And that will give you an answer to the question that y'all are constantly asking. Oh shoot, why didn't I think of that? Giving my kid a present and active father? That didn't even occur to me. Wow. Like, do y'all hear how stupid you sound when you say that? Well, it was your responsibility to make sure you picked a man that you knew was going to be nice and good and present. That is your job, to be psychic. Give me a break. Like, putting aside the fact that accidental pregnancies happen and do happen often, y'all have got to accept the fact that these relationships are not as black and white as you think, and the onus does not lay entirely on the woman. Like, these guys do not parade around their red flags on the first date or even the second date or even the third date sometimes. You fall in love with a person. And I mean in love with a person. You see the best in them. They show the best of them. And along the way, while they're off being, a neutral or even sucky partner, there are moments where you see that person, that really awesome person that would be a good partner and a great father, and then they change. And then you have the audacity to fuss at us. Like, we just picked someone who was awful because you think you had that foresight that no one has. Like, y'all really say, oh, I agree, he should be a better person, but you should have known that he wasn't gonna be and pick someone else. How was I to know that the person who loved me, that I loved, was going to change? What does that even? But no, you're right. I should, as a grown adult woman, seek out other grown adult men who are going to be the same and never change, and just have the foresight to know that they might change, and then operate like a psychic would. Why didn't I think of that? I am not stupid. I've never not once been stupid, and I didn't suddenly lose my brain cells because I got pregnant. Y'all have a tendency, a real nasty one, to infantilize and belittle single moms as if we are just hormonally driven, absent-minded, desperate to be mothers, so bad that we don't take our children's well-being into account, and it needs to end. Never mind the fact that you all actually don't know what put most single moms in the position that they're in. I highly suggest you all start taking issue with the real issue in the scenario, which is not the parent that stayed, which is not the parent that loves their kid anyway. It's the other person. Maybe you need to consider for a second that the issue is not the fact that there isn't a male figure in the house. It's that oftentimes these children are under-supported and undervalued because we live in a society that doesn't like kids and doesn't like single moms, and you treat them accordingly. Because I know good and well that if you saw a child in a two-parent household, even if that household was falling apart, you wouldn't have the gall to say, okay, but did you think about the way that they would struggle? You would leave them alone because you don't actually care about the struggle or well-being of this child. You want to shame and belittle someone for a choice that they made that you personally wouldn't have made. Now, all that being said, we also act like everybody gets pregnant by choice. And I want you all to remember that accidental pregnancies do in fact happen. And unless you live in a state where you actually have access to abortions and also a spare $600,000 laying about, you too could end up in this position. And I would assume that your next step is to stop sleeping with men. But I can guarantee you, I'm not talking to a room full of virgins, am I? In fact, I know that this commenter probably isn't, as in their bio they say kitty queen, meaning that this scenario could very easily happen to them. And what I'm highly suggesting to all of you is that you get up off that high horse that you think you sit upon and come back to reality, where conversations have nuance and women and partnerships are complex and complicated, and people, grown adults, can make their own decisions. Now, if you are so concerned about the well-being of my child or any child who happens to be with a single parent, a single mother specifically, I suggest you stop belittling that single mother and pretending like you care so deeply, and actually show that you care. Be a part of her village. Send me $1. Send the other single mother $1. Donate resources that you don't need to a women's shelter. Make yourself useful in some capacity besides complaining on the internet that we don't care about our kids because we're just so desperate to be mothers, and accept the fact that maybe, just maybe, even if there aren't two parents, that this child can grow up loved and supported. Or you can just shut up.
One of the most anticipated horror films of the year, Late Night with the Devil, has been confirmed to have used AI-generated images, and the conversation around it is more complicated than one might think. Now, to be clear, I've been incredibly upfront about my personal disdain for generative AI, and I don't think there's a place for it in film. However, I think there are a couple of important points to note with this film in particular. It's not an excuse, it's just something to note before we engage in the conversation in good faith. And the first is, this film was released over a year ago, before the Hollywood strikes happened at all, before we had this huge mainstream conversation about the use of AI, before it became a huge sticking point in the contract negotiations of those Hollywood strikes. It premiered on March 10th at South by Southwest last year. Another thing worth noting is that there have been other projects that have come out in the time since then that have also used AI that haven't gotten quite the extreme backlash that this film has gotten. Notably, the intro credits for Secret Invasion used AI. Now those also premiered in like June of 2023, so it was while the AI conversation had just gotten started, and I don't think people thought it was as big of a deal back then. I think if it premiered today, it would have a very different response. But more recently than that, in True Detective Night Country, which is a show that I was a big fan of, there was this scandal about the use of AI poster art in the background. And there was an attempt to explain it away as an in-universe explanation of some kid making it, but frankly, I don't believe that. And honestly, I think the reason why Late Night with the Devil is getting a more extreme reaction is because it is a small indie horror film and people expect the artists behind projects like this to have more integrity and more respect for the artistic process than a huge company like Disney or WB. That being said, I don't necessarily agree that they deserve more scrutiny than those large companies, but I think the timing of it all is not super great. Now, to be explicitly clear, the problem here is generative AI. There are other AI technologies that are useful and helpful and have been used, like in Dune Part 2, they used an AI software to help track the actors' eyes in the process of turning them blue. In Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, they used an AI supplemental tool that helped them track the character movements to better place the character line art that is overlaid on top of their faces. These are tools that are made to help the drudgery, the monotonous, slow work. There are AI engines that can help remove background noise in audio files. This is work that is just extremely tedious and takes a ton of time. And to be clear, even that kind of AI is going to reduce human labor. It is going to reduce those kinds of things. But it's very different than creating a tool that completely circumvents any need for artists and is entirely trained on stolen works of artists, as is the case with generative AI and the stills that are used in this film, Late Night with the Devil. So how big of a deal actually is this? People are talking about boycotting this film. I mean, I would argue it is a pretty big deal, but the thing that frustrates me the most is the filmmaker's response, because they've already responded to these claims, said that yes, they did it, they experimented with it, and they don't really think it's that big of a deal. I think that attitude kind of sucks. I think it's kind of understandable how they would have experimented with this over a year ago before the conversation was as heated as it is now. But I also think it's kind of a cop-out to resort to something like this in general when people have been making low-budget films for decades. And if you didn't have access to this technology 2 years ago, what would you have done? There's a million creative solutions, even if they didn't have the budget. And even still, the budget for something like this is so small. But the response to this just sucked. It seemed like they don't really care, like they would do it again, and that they don't have a problem with normalizing stuff like this, whether it be on small budget or big budget projects, which are going to lead to people losing jobs, which I just think sucks. I don't think that this should be normalized at all. Also, it's weird to just double down and say yeah, we did it, instead of, I don't know, it would be so easy to make a quick edit to it to respond to the backlash and say, yeah, you know what, we fucked up, we shouldn't have done that. It was before this conversation was mainstream, so we didn't realize how offended people would be by it, but now we want to make the appropriate changes considering how much fucking momentum this film had right before this happened. It's shocking. So I'm not really 100% sure where I stand on this right now. I don't really know. Obviously, a lot of people were involved. Film is very collaborative, but I don't want this to be normalized by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know. It kind of sucks. It came out this morning that OpenAI has scheduled meetings with Hollywood studios and talent agencies in order to encourage them to use AI in their work. And if you're curious, this is why we take even small uses of AI in film very seriously. And I just think you should know, this kind of reaction, this rolling your eyes at people who are upset at the film Late Night with the Devil for using AI just because it's a high quality independent film and they only use 2 images. First of all, there's evidence to suggest that's not true. There's evidence to suggest that AI is used more intricately in the design of the film than was previously suggested. But even if that wasn't the case, this is opening a really fucking dangerous door. The reason why people are taking such a strong stance against the use of AI in Late Night with the Devil and saying things like, well, I will not be seeing it in theaters, is because the only thing these studios care about is money. If this film is made an example of, and yes, I agree, it's super unfortunate that this is the film that this is happening to, because I was very much looking forward to it, but if this is the film that's made an example of, it sends a very clear message to studios that people will not spend their money on art made with AI. Because be so fucking for real right now. Do you think if big studios decide to start working with AI, they're going to stop at just a couple of transitional images, just a little bit of background art, just a little bit of audio cloning to fix in post? Like, of course they're fucking not. And like I said in my last video, there are ways that AI is innovating and changing the industry for the better that is inadvertently still going to reduce the amount of labor needed. The Dune movies are a perfect example. In the first film, each frame that had blue eyes present, those eyes had to be hand painted on each individual frame. That's incredibly time consuming, laborious, like just tedious work that takes up budget, takes up time, and is one of the prime examples of why VFX artists are so overworked and underpaid right now. And being able to relieve some of the effort there, being able to use eye tracking technology to assist with that work is actually a huge help in the industry, despite the fact that it technically does reduce like labor. Generative AI, on the other hand, in addition to all of these engines being trained on stolen art, entirely circumvents the artistic process. It removes any need for human artistry whatsoever and does it all for you. And sure, you can tweak it and edit it afterwards and say you did something, but that is not the fucking point. Okay, I don't know why it's so hard for people to believe that artists actually like making art. People don't go into this industry and take these exhausting jobs where they're overworked and they get shit pay because they really, they want to meet their goals. They want to make all of the content points that they've been advised to at the end of the day. It's because they love it. It's because they have a passion for it. It's because people want to make art. And I also don't know why it's surprising to people that audiences might not have any interest in seeing art made by a machine, because maybe that's not why audiences want to watch art. And maybe most importantly of all, for all of those people who say things like, oh, well, finally artists will have to get a real job, or I don't really give a shit about the arts. Yeah, no shit. You're not alone there. Our government has been defunding the arts for fucking decades. But the thing is, this is not going to be isolated to just artistic professions. Like, this is going to be a massive, disruptor in all labor. So unless we're all going to agree right here and now that the government owes all of us a basic living income just so that we can survive and survive the allegedly inevitable automation that a lot of people aren't even willing to put up just the most minimal of fights against, we're going to need to figure something else out, because this shit is coming for us all and it's very serious. I personally, after seeing this recent news that OpenAI is aggressively meeting with studios, I can't support a movie that uses AI at all. I think it's very important to show studios that people will not pay for this, because what other recourse do we have? What else can we do to show them that this is not okay? If you don't care, good for you, I guess. Best of luck. I don't know.
My top 3 movies of all time. Wow. You might not like my answers. As a film student myself, a connoisseur of the industry, I can't help but feel that I have a much higher level of comprehension when it comes to film than the average American.
Okay, so I generally don't like to stitch people, and at the end of the day, this guy's just making a joke. It's not that deep. He's certainly not the only person on this app to have made this exact same joke beat for beat, so not a lot of points for originality, but that's neither here nor there. My issue is the way he starts out this video with this character that's supposed to be a pretentious film bro asshole saying something that's supposed to be comedic in and of itself. I've studied film, and therefore I think I know more than the average American on this topic. That shouldn't be controversial. That should just be an accepted truth. I don't know why people have this animosity towards people who take an academic interest in the study of the arts. And to be clear, you don't have to get a degree to study film. Some of the greatest filmmakers of our time don't have any formal education in the topic, but they do study the art form. If a doctor got in this app and said, these are my 4 favorite tools for practicing medicine, either they represent huge medical breakthroughs or they are incredibly effective at treating patients in my practice, would people freak out if they were obscure doctor-specific things? Would they say, this guy is such a pretentious prick? I can't believe he didn't say ibuprofen and Band-Aids? And obviously, studying the arts is very different than studying medicine. But at the end of the day, it's studying. It's people who have taken time and put in the effort to learn and become experts on these topics. So, of course, they're going to have more involved answers than someone who has never studied these things. Why is it only with the arts that this is such a laughable idea to people? Like, you wouldn't walk into fucking NASA and say, oh, what, do you think you're better than me because you're an astrophysicist with 3 degrees? At that specific thing, yeah, I think they're better than you. But people like movies. And of course, in this insanely individualistic and performative culture we have now, the movies that we like, we view as foundational representations of ourselves. And so, of course, if the movies you like aren't considered cool or prestigious or smart enough, then that is a direct reflection on you and your value in society. So when you see a video of someone who has studied film listing their favorite films and you don't recognize any of them and you haven't seen any of them, you don't see see that as an opportunity to grow or merely a sense of self-expression from someone else. You see it as a direct attack on you, of yourself not being good enough, of your performance and enjoyment of the media that surrounds us as being insufficient. And that's just foundationally not what's fucking happening. Art is something for everyone to enjoy. And you know what? It's supposed to be personal. It's supposed to be specific. It's great if a piece of art resonates with you on a different level than other people, but it should never be a competition. And if you have no interest in putting time and energy into studying the art form or the history behind it, that's totally cool. Like, you do not have to be an expert, but it's super weird to look down on people who do want to spend their time learning more about it and who do want to spend time becoming an educated expert in this field. The other thing that's crazy to me is the assumptions people make about these films that they've never heard of. The assumption that all of these films must be, pretentious, inaccessible art house films just because they were made in a different country and a different language, when half the time these are just films that inspired like the modern day slasher genre. And if you ever did watch any of these films, I think you'd be surprised at how fun and accessible and sometimes silly they are. Like, these were people experimenting and having fun. And it's okay if you don't ever want to get into that. But it's just super weird to act like this is some crazy, inaccessible thing that people are trying to gatekeep from you, when in fact, it's the exact opposite. People are telling you, these are the films that inspired me. You can check them out if you want to. That's an invitation. No one is telling you, I think I'm better than you. They're trying to share something they're passionate about with you. You're the one being a dick about it. This is honestly the point for me. People treat artists like shit, and they always have. When I was a kid, when I was, taking art in school, all the way up to high school and higher level art, my friends, not just my parents, not just their parents, that too, but my actual friends would constantly say shit to me like, oh my God, I wish I could just take art. It's such a nothing class. My own friends would make fun of me that I was going to be poor for the rest of my life and how stupid and what a waste of time it was for me to get a degree in the arts. I constantly got it from adults in my life, and it didn't help that I graduated during the recession, so no one could get jobs in any field, but I got told constantly that my failure was because I picked a stupid industry. I picked studying the arts. How fucking stupid could I be? And when I actually talked about the shit that I liked, literally everyone around me rolled their eyes. Not because I was being pretentious. A lot of times I was freaking out about something like Iron Man, but people were just like, oh my God, nobody gives a shit. This is such an uncool thing to be interested in. That's the thing that I think a lot of people, I don't understand how this perception of, artists having this power and being elitist comes from, because artists are almost always fucking nerds. And that goes double for fucking cinephiles, okay? As someone who identifies as both, yeah, it's deeply uncool. And I don't understand if it's because a lot of people like that are socially awkward, or if it just comes from this overblown stereotype that, frankly, I encounter in the real world, so rarely. And I have been in these spaces for so much of my life. And absolutely, pretentious cinephile douchebags exist. Absolutely those guys exist, but they exist in every field for any interest you could possibly imagine. I've had men condescend to me about how to properly do a silverware napkin roll-up at restaurants and how I'm doing it wrong. Men will find a way to condescend to you. For sure that happens. But I feel like genuinely the experience that I've had far more often is dudes whose favorite movie is fucking Star Wars, or fucking any Tarantino lovers, Christopher Nolan lovers of these pop directors who are just super, super popular. This idea of an actual cinephile that's gonna tell you that you should watch fucking Salo and Fellini, I don't really think that I don't think it's as common as people are pretending that it are. And I don't think that it's more common in film than it is with pretentious douchebag dudes in literally any industry. And furthermore, I don't believe that those guys are who that original video that I stitched or any of the videos on this app that make fun of that shit is about. Because you can go to Letterboxd right now on this app and look at their comments and see what people say when people give answers that aren't fucking Interstellar or The Wizard of Oz. I'm so serious. The biggest controversy that Letterboxd had was when Emma Stone gave her 4 favorites for Poor Things, and they were, not films that most people had heard of. Or when Austin Butler said that he liked The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Those are not stereotypes of pretentious film bros. Those are just people, industry professionals who like movies, and nothing about their tone or cadence was like, I'm better than you. That's the other thing. There's so many comments on that video, people saying like, well, you're proving the point, look at you, you're so fucking pretentious. The last movie I actually recommended on this app was a rom-com that has 32% on Rotten Tomatoes. I get called pretentious every fucking day. Listen, I definitely can be pretentious sometimes. I think everyone can be if we're being honest with ourselves. But you know what? Like, I try really hard. I've always tried really hard to make the things that I'm interested in, like, to help other people connect with me over them. Like, I feel I resonate with Abed from Community so much because movies are genuinely a way that I have found to connect with people my entire life, because I really struggle connecting with people. Most of the people that I know in these spaces, like, this is genuinely, like, trying to share passion. And what those videos are making fun of are not... It's a stereotype that I think is being leveraged in service of anti-intellectualism. And yes, absolutely, there are dudes like that I avoid at all costs and always have. But the reason why, like, at their core, I think these videos are just bad jokes that are based on projection and insecurities is because it's the exact same format that conservatives use to make their joke videos about, like, a blue-haired liberal that's like a crazy caricature, and they make a character say, like, the most inflammatory shit that's just gonna piss them off so that they can say, oh, liberals are so stupid. And it's like, a liberal didn't say this shit, dude. You did. Like, the majority of these jokes in these videos are not making fun of these douchebag caricatures. They're making fun of the movies. Like, the whole joke of the video is that these slow, boring, pretentious movies actually suck. And this guy is only pretending that they're good because he's a pretentious douche. Like, that sucks.
Is Misty Quigley from Yellow Jackets certifiably insane? Yes. Was she the reason the Yellow Jackets were stranded in the Canadian wilderness for as long as they were? No! Does she destroy the black box? Yeah. However, black boxes are only activated by water. It wouldn't have been activated anyways. And this little thing that people are like, it drives me crazy because they were not stranded for as long as they were because the black box was destroyed. It was never activated. Assuming their emergency locator transmitter was working and in good order, it would have detected the strong impact of the crash and started emitting a signal. And considering this was the 90s, this charter plane would have had a 121.5 megahertz ELT. If a 121.5 megahertz ELT is detected, that still gives search and rescue teams about 486 square miles to look, which is a lot of square miles. I'm not saying that Misty Quigley is blameless in any situation. She's insane. However, she is not the reason they were stranded for as long as they were. This just bothers me when people say that because she's just simply not the reason. If they had crashed in the lake, the black box would have started emitting a beacon, and then maybe it would have been a little bit easier to find them. Like, who knows if they would have even gotten out if it had crashed in the water. So I don't know. I can't call myself a Misty Quigley defender, but honestly, to be honest, I can't really be any of the girls' defenders. That's the thing about Yellow Jackets, is that there are things that happen that the protagonists do that are not defendable things at all. And I'm not talking about cannibalizing their teammates to survive the winter, because that had been done before, you know, like that's not unheard of. People have had to do crazy shit just to survive. While it might not be a moral choice, it also wasn't necessarily a choice. What happened to Jackie and Travis during Doomcoming when everybody was taking substances? Were they in their right minds? No. Does that make anything that happened that night even remotely excusable? Also no. Like, the fact of the matter is that the majority of the girls in this cabin partook in non-consensually doing things with somebody who was audibly saying no. And Misty is no less guilty in this scenario than anybody else. Like, that, in my opinion, is a completely inexcusable thing on any grounds. Like, I've been in some pretty loopy headspaces and have never come to the conclusion that doing something like that would ever in any universe ever be okay. So in that regard, there are very few people in this scenario of Yellow Jackets who I can actually defend as people. Like, there are decisions that are immoral, but also survival-based, so the morality of the situation is kind of out of the question. For example, eating Jackie and Javi to survive. And then there are decisions that are immoral, just for morality's sake, like assaulting Travis. And hence, I hope I have made my case as to why Natalie is my favorite character in the entire show. I feel like Jackie from Yellow Jackets gets so much unjust hate from the fan base. Like, she is such a teenage girl. She's such a teenage girl. And also completely in love with Shauna. Like, Jackie's and Shauna's relationship so closely mirrors so many relationships I had with other girls my age growing up, where we were like in love with each other, but we didn't like realize that we were in love with each other because we didn't realize that was like a possibility yet. And it manifested as like being just super possessive and like led to all of these like jealous fights about things and competition and stuff like that. Like, in my opinion, their relationship so accurately encapsulates the essence of like teenage queer girlhood. And people like to get mad at Jackie for being like volatile and not pulling her weight when she was at the cabin, and then for sleeping with Travis when he was in love with Natalie. But I think all of her reactions to everything that happens are so valid. Like, she did not want to give up being a teenage girl because she was in the throes of teenage girlhood when they left on that flight. She said it herself. She had lost sleep the night before they left, worrying about a soccer game. She wanted to worry about whether or not she was going to lose her virginity before college. She didn't want to worry about how she was going to survive the winter. She wants to have agency over when she gives up her own innocence. She doesn't drink the shroom stew or drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. She and Travis sleep together, and she like kind of ticks off that thing that she had wanted to do before she went to college. She calls Shauna out for sleeping with her boyfriend. She gets all of these things off of her chest that she had been holding in for so long. And then on her own accord, she goes outside, lays down, and goes to sleep, and never wakes up. And then ultimately saves all of the rest of the girls in the cabin. Maybe not in the way she would have expected to, but you know. And as sad as it is that Jackie didn't survive, I'm also glad that she died when she did, because she never had to lose her innocence in a way she didn't want to. And much like her role as soccer captain, even if she didn't necessarily have a ton to bring to the table skill-wise, she was still the reason they were as successful as they were. Just think, if there's anything that we can learn from the JoJo Siwa fiasco and the J-Lo fiasco, it's not to surround yourself with yes people. You need to have people in your life who can tell you when to stop. But not only that, you need to stay in touch with reality and hear people when they are telling you to stop doing something. Because the whole thing with J-Lo and JoJo Siwa, it seems as if their target demographic at this point is J-Lo and JoJo Siwa. And the more they continue to do this, the larger of a gap there is between them and their audience. Like, we don't care about edgy Miley Cyrus JoJo Siwa. If she wants to be edgy Miley Cyrus JoJo Siwa, that's fine, but we want her to be honest about it. I was a bad girl. I did bad things. Tell us which bad things you did. We don't care that you think you were a bad girl if you can't tell us which bad things you did. The vagueness of the lyrics and the inauthenticity of the marketing makes it feel juvenile. It makes me feel like I'm listening to a girl in my youth group confess something she's super guilty about, and it's like she thought a swear word. And this isn't helped by the fact that you won't even let yourself say fuck in your song. And like, this whole rebrand has been so poorly received. And it might not have been that way if JoJo Siwa was able to listen to her audience and listen to the people telling her that this isn't going to work and that this is a bad idea. If she'd instead marketed herself as honest and authentic and raw, people would have responded to that a lot more positively, because previously she's been known for being the complete opposite. Like, if J-Lo had had some no people on her team, maybe she could have taken that $20 million and put it towards something really beneficial for the general public and her community that she apparently is a part of, which would have probably shifted the public perception of her a hell of a lot more than whatever dumpster fire she just put on Amazon Prime. It's just truly fascinating to watch, because it's really easy to think like, how did they not consider how people would respond to this? But it's because they are so out of touch with reality. They have been in a bubble for so long that they truly, I don't think, realize what people want to see or hear anymore. Yeah, the other reason why JoJo Siwa can't really be more specific than I was a bad girl, I did some bad things in her lyric, is because the bad things she did aren't like your typical breaking innocence bad girl things. At least not the things people know about and will assume when hearing that lyric. They're going to think about how poorly she treated her previous partners, and the fact that she, as a child star who was very mistreated on the set of Dance Moms, turned around and did the same thing to a bunch of other young dancers. They're going to think about the fact that she is still friends with known predators, and the fact that she is still clearly very close with Abby Lee Miller, who, as fun as it is to meme on, is a terrible person. Like, the vagueness is not benefiting her in any way, shape, or form in this scenario. She needed to use lyrics that would make her relatable. Don't keep your audience guessing. Just be honest. Just own up to things. Just be authentic. Just take accountability. That is how you get your audience to start respecting you again. But at this point, she has done so many things publicly that have made people lose respect for her that any amount of vagueness is going to seem like she's evading any amount of accountability for those things. Which, when contrasted with her very Shake It Up Chicago Descendants-ass sounding song, makes it sound like an email from your corporate boss. We might have moved past this as a society. I have not. Why is there no season 3 of The Wilds on Amazon Prime? Of all of the shows you could have canceled, you canceled The Wilds after 2 seasons. Like, I've been rewatching season 1 this week, and I'm getting close to season 2, and I'm already filling with anger because so much riveting shit happens that season. There's a lot that I don't like, but so much riveting shit happens that season, and we never get to find out what happened. This was like genuinely cruel and unusual punishment to cancel this show. Like, I have never been so devastated by a show being canceled before the storyline was finished being told. Like, what was the reason? What was the reason? I don't care what your reason was, because none of them are good enough. Like, I'm getting angry talking about it because I know that once I finish season 2, I'm going to be so upset that there's no season 3, and I'm going to reel over it for the next several months until I rewatch The Wilds again. However, if you too were obsessed with The Wilds and are upset about the lack of closure, might I suggest to you the novel Beauty Queens by Libba Bray. The premise is pretty much the same, and it actually has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's really good. It's also really funny, so I recommend.
I am going to say something, and I don't want to sound pretentious or like I have a superiority complex, because I promise I don't. But the people in this community need to start specifying when they're talking about fantasy romance and when they're talking about fantasy. Like, I'm talking adult, like high fantasy, right? Because y'all will be like, oh, fantasy recommendations, and the whole video will be romantasy. And it's like, personally for me, I'm not a romantasy girl. I tried to get into it, it's just not for me. It does not like focus on a fantasy enough. I don't care what you guys say. Like, it focuses too much on the smut and the romance, and I really don't care about romances when I'm reading a fantasy book, because I'm usually here for like the politics, the adventure, the fighting scenes, like all of that, the plot. And a lot of the times the fantasy romance plots just are like, they're fantasy romance plots, but they're also just like not like strong, like, you know. So make sure you specify when you're recommending somebody fantasy that you mean romantasy. Thank you. Okay, so I am entering this universe for like the first time. I watched House of the Dragon. I on season 5 of Game of Thrones. I read this book and Rise of the Dragon, which are the same book. But I just want to talk about how well the women in this universe is freaking written. I have never consumed media and came out with this many favorite female characters. They're such strong characters, and not strong in the sense of like, oh, people can fight. They're strong in the sense of like being smart, strong in the sense of like using their femininity to their best ability. Like Arya, she's such a strong like fighter. She's a strong character. Like, she has like this will to like do something, and once she sets her mind to it, she will. Sansa is not a fighter, but you know what she has? She has brains. She can manipulate and think her way in or out of a situation. But then you have a character like Margaery, who I wouldn't say she's not smart, but she knows how to manipulate people, yes. But it's like she uses her beauty to like get her in places in like the world, and I love that. And then you have Rhaenyra, who I just love a bad bitch, okay? And I read the book. I cannot wait. Rhaenyra, I meant to say Rhaenyra, I'm so sorry. The characters, the one thing about this universe is how similar their names are. So yeah, but yeah, Rhaenyra, I absolutely love Rhaenyra. She's such a strong character. I cannot wait for Rhaenyra the Cruel Bela, literally one of my favorite characters. We haven't seen much of her, but I think she's strong. Lena, literally, I mean, if you, no spoilers, but she doesn't have much. She doesn't have any scenes, really. She has like maybe like 4 scenes, and you can tell she's such a strong character, such a strong fighter. She's not really in the book either, but you can tell she's kind. You can tell she's strong. Like, the women in this universe are just so beautiful and like well written. Even women that I hate, like I cannot stand Cersei, but like even in moments where like, okay, so like I said, I'm in season 5, so the episode where she goes to visit Marguerite and she's like basically laughing her face, and then at the end of the day Marguerite gets the last laugh and she's in the same place that Marguerite is, I can still feel bad for Cersei as a character, and I just think that is insane. I am somebody who reads a lot of fantasy. I am somebody who reads a lot of sci-fi. Okay, they are my 2 main genres. I read a lot written by men. Most of my favorite authors are women. Like, all of my favorite authors are women. But I read a lot written by men because that is who dominates that genre, right? And one thing I can say is, like, some of them are not good at writing women. I'm gonna be real with you. Like, some of them are flat out misogynist. Some of them are flat out sexist. I literally just read Ender's Game, a book where children can be put in the military, but it's not common for women to be put in the military because evolution just didn't work out for them. Children under the age of like 6, like children who are 6, 9, 10, they can be put in the military, but it's just impossible for women to be put in the military. Or like the 3-body problem. I love the 3-body problem, don't get me wrong, but it's flat out sexist. So to go from like reading those like sci-fi fantasy series that don't really have a lot of women, the women aren't characterized well, and then to read, or not even read, but to be put in this universe. Also, if you want something that's well written with women, read Leviathan Wakes, because the authors of that book worked on Game of Thrones, and now having that, like, I already knew that, but like now, like consuming Game of Thrones for myself and I can like see it, I'm like, this is literally crazy. So the other day I did a video on like why romantasy and fantasy aren't necessarily the same thing, and a lot of people were like asking me if I could do a video on like what's the difference. So I thought it would be fun. I did a Venn diagram on the difference between romantasy, fantasy, and fantasy romance. So these are all based off of my opinions, my observation. My credibilities are, I have been a reader my entire life. I have been in the book community since 2017. So I've read over 1,000 books. I read a little bit of everything. There's not a genre that has not seen me. So those are my credibilities. Before we get into that, here is my Venn diagram. So romantasy. Think about romantasy is that it's mostly romance. So it's romance fantasy. So it's mostly romance with a little bit of fantasy. Sometimes the fantasy is barely even there, which is the reason why I don't really like romantasy, because it's like it'll be some random ass plot that was like pulled out of your ass, which is fine. Like, that's totally fine. It's just not for me personally. And then one thing that I've noticed with romantasy is that it's not very diverse. Like, there aren't a lot of Black authors in that genre. There aren't a lot of authors of color, period, in that genre. There's not a lot of sapphic romance in that genre. And then a little like asterisk I have here is that most of the time romantasy authors are like the most problematic ones. So then you have like Sarah J Maas, Fourth Wing, which is like Serpents in the Wing of Night. 9 times out of 10, if you come across a problematic author, they usually write romantasy. That's just something I noticed. That's just something I want to throw in there. I don't really know for sure. And so here are my examples. My examples of romantasy will be from Blood and Ash, Divine Rivals, which that book really pisses me off because it's set in a fantasy world about a war between gods, and you don't get anything from that. It's mostly just romance. In Education and Malice, which is sapphic, which I really loved. Kingdom of the Wicked, Guild, and The Time I Got Drunk, which is like the only Black author that I could think of at the time. Then we get on to fantasy romance. So it's mostly fantasy with a subplot of romance. So to me, there's a difference between a subplot of romance and having romance. To me, those are two different things. So with fantasy romance, it has a subplot of romance. These are usually books written by women. A lot of the time I notice that these are YA, and they're gonna be, to me, they're better than romantasies. And then an asterisk I have is low-key, you could look up both romantasy and fantasy romance, because I don't think a lot of people realize there's a difference between these two. So some examples I have are, let me zoom in actually. Okay, Sorcery of Thorns, Children of Blood and Bone, Strange the Dreamer, any Elise Kova books, although I don't recommend them. I think her books are ass, but she writes a lot of fantasy romance. This Vicious Grades and The Wrath of Ruins. So then we get on to fantasy. I don't know why I didn't zoom in before. I'm so sorry. So then we get into fantasy. So the difference is it's mostly fantasy, focuses a lot on the world building and the plot. And then it has tiny romance or might not have romance at all. And then the asterisk that I put here is that this can be hard to connect with people that like this genre because it tends to be a lot of men and they tend to be misogynistic towards women who like this as well. That's not always the case, but I do want to note that as someone in these fandoms who has experienced this firsthand, it does happen pretty often. Some examples I have are The Poppy War, A Song of Ice and Fire, Cruel Prince, Six of Crows. So then for like crossing over, so for all three of them, they can have romance. That is what connects all three of them, is that they can have romance. And it's also set in another world. And then I could also say that they do have world building and plot, but most of the romances I read don't really have like plot. Not gonna lie. Okay, and then the similarities between fantasy and fantasy romance is that romance takes a back seat. And then also these two genres are usually more diverse. Like I found more authors of color, queer authors, characters with disabilities. I find them more in these two genres. And then with romantasy and fantasy romance, what makes them similar is that it has more of one thing than the other. So one has more fantasy and one has more romance. I couldn't really think of any similarities between romantasy and fantasy that don't already connect all three of them. But yeah, I wish I could have like filmed this better, but this is what it looks like. If you want to see this like bigger, let me know. And then also I am gonna be doing one for Enemies to Lovers, Hate to Love, and Rivals to Lovers. So if you want to see that one, please let me know because I would love to do another one of these. This was so much fun.
One of the copper, because it ain't silver, linings of the many atrocities that are gripping the world right now is that it has led many people to question everything that Western society has ever taught us. And I just want to encourage more of that going forward. Question the idea of crime. How a citizen shoplifting or misrepresenting their income to get benefits is seen as more egregious than a government that allows its constituents to suffer in poverty, often driving them to desperate measures, all while allocating billions to war crimes. Question the carceral system. How we're told that it's for rehabilitation and that cruel and unusual punishment is never to be inflicted. So how do we see things like a man being eaten to death by bed bugs and another one being boiled in a scalding shower by guards who were never charged? Question how, as a civilian with no training, you're expected to stay perfectly calm while staring in the face of a firearm. But an officer with training can shoot an unarmed person and claim that he just reacted out of fear. Question religion and how we live under the power of controlling white men who immediately go to punitive measures when you don't follow their agenda, and that's exactly how Christianity frames God. Question what freedom represents in a society where you can't even protest your living conditions without the fear of being arrested or murdered. Question race. Question gender. Question sexuality. Question your education and what you know about countries outside of the U.S. And lastly, question the term terrorist. Because we all know they're very selective in who gets called that.
Well, Israel is not an occupying force in Gaza. Israelis can't even go into Gaza. Hamas.
That is Marianne Williamson, who some have been touting as the presidential candidate that will save America. And I just have to say, that clip displays why I fear that my career in social commentary and advocacy will only go so far. I lack the restraint that it takes to sit there calmly while being gaslighted by somebody who's asking for my vote. Lauren stated a fact that the occupation of Gaza has been an issue long before October 7th. And Marianne's response was,
There before October 7th.
Excuse me?
She then proceeds to deny that an occupation has even taken place and agrees that this phrase is equivalent to calling for genocide. I'm telling you, I couldn't have sat there quietly. I could not. Because my response would have been, ma'am, it's clear that you are aligned with other aspiring politicians who co-opt social justice and revolution when it's convenient for your campaign, all the while being too pussy to actually stand on the principles that you claim to hold. I would also let her know that this is why Democratic candidates are losing support even amongst leftists. Because we recognize that though y'all say the right things, when we really dig into your politic, you're just as untrustworthy as the others. And I know that Marianne has been calling for a ceasefire. I've been seeing people say that we can't expect perfection from our candidates. But we're not asking for perfection, just a candidate who's willing to address these issues in a way that's actually impactful and that represents the people. And most of these motherfuckers aren't even willing to acknowledge the issues in their entirety. So how can they address them? The way my hair stood up on the back of my neck when I saw this fucking photo. And I know that it's supposed to be some joke nodding towards the Super Bowl that makes Grandpa Joe look relatable, but it looks sinister as fuck. And it was shared as Israel launched one of its most egregious airstrikes yet, the attack on Rafah. This is the most densely populated place in Palestine, and it's also the place that was deemed safe by the IDF. Meaning they are knowingly striking the place that they told Palestinians to evacuate to. This comes only a short while after we heard the news of Hind, a 6-year-old girl who was trapped in a car surrounded by the bodies of her loved ones that had been martyred by Israel. And when 2 paramedics were able to reach her, the IDF murdered all 3 of them. Our country is directly complicit in all of this, and I can't help but recognize how this image represents truly how fucking evil that is. And there has been a lot of discussion about whether it was intentional that they launched this airstrike during the Super Bowl, which is less of a conspiracy theory and more of an acknowledgement of how everything is connected. It makes sense that these acts would be structured around American consumerism and pop culture. Considering that celebrity culture has gotten so out of hand that we have these people writing letters to the president co-signing his political action when they have no political knowledge, they just have a talent that we enjoy. And a great deal of global humanitarian crises are caused by American consumerism and greed. The genocide in Congo is a very relevant example of this, where men, women, and children are being murdered, enslaved, and displaced by the millions so that we can have the materials used to make our electronics. Hey, I just want to get on here real quick and say, if you've noticed that some of your favorite large social justice creators aren't speaking out about the genocide of the Palestinian people as a response to the unjust killing of those 1,400 Israelis, it may not be that they're being silent, they may be being stifled. I have tried to post this video a total of about 15 times now between here and Instagram. Each time it's being blocked. This time, they didn't even let it get past 5 seconds before I got an instant community guidelines violation. They are stifling voices. And that's why we are saying that the blood of this tragedy does not just lie on Hamas, the Israeli government, or the American government. It is very much on the hands of the media as well. The news media and social media. They are silencing us. Please go do your own research, guys.
If you're looking to avoid performative activism right now, the 5 Calls app might be helpful for you. You can find it in the App Store. It's completely free and really easy to use. So this is what it looks like in the App Store. This is what you're looking for. And once you get it open, it'll look like this. You can just swipe on over and hit Get Started. It'll show you immediately a bunch of issues. The one you want is right at the top. And it'll give you some information about that issue with lots of links in case you want to click out and learn more. Once you get to the bottom, you can set your location, go ahead and pop in your zip, and it will auto-populate your representatives. These are mine. And if you just click one, it'll bring you over to this page, which gives you their number, and you can click that. It'll dial for you, and it provides a script in case you don't know what to say. I hope that's helpful.
In response to me being very critical of Biden and his handling of that's currently occurring in Gaza, I had somebody ask, and snarkily, may I add, have you reconsidered your stance on conservatism? And to that, I have to say, I would rather get a pap smear with a hot fire poker. Because let's be clear, this isn't just the problem of the current administration, though they do have blood on their hands for how they've chosen to handle it. America has a long-standing history with the Israeli government. We invest billions in weapons for the IDF to carry out these acts while there are children starving on our own soil. Our stance on this issue should not be a surprise because this nation is also founded on the violent ethnic cleansing of another group, and it has sustained itself through the enslavement and oppression of several other groups as well. If there was currently a Republican president in office, the result would largely be the same, if not even more egregious. In fact, because of their blatant attempts to endorse fascism and contribute to the erasure of marginalized groups in the last several years, I wholeheartedly believe that if conservatives were given the chance to erase Black, brown, Muslim, immigrant, queer, and non-compliant women using the same tactics we are currently seeing in Gaza, they would. So please don't think that I or any other creator that's critical of Biden is supporting Trump or conservatism. I think the fact that so many people who voted for Biden are so willing to be openly critical of him is one of the main differences between us and the cult that is conservatism. I just also want to spread the message that somebody simply identifying as leftist, progressive, or Democrat does not absolve them from collective and tangible harm. All I want to say is that they don't give a fuck about us, or whatever Michael said. Keep getting comments under my videos about Gaza saying, well, Chris, be careful supporting a nation that will condemn you for being a homosexual. And I don't know how some of you are unaware of this, but bing bong, we live in a nation that's working very hard to condemn us as homosexuals. Every day, especially with the work that I do, I navigate spaces with people knowing that they would see me being gay as a reason why I don't deserve my full human rights. And still, if somebody launched massive airstrikes in the middle of Florida or Texas, resulting in thousands of casualties, I would still care. I've also been receiving comments like, they don't even like Black people. This is not our business. Completely diminishing the history of solidarity that Palestinians have shown towards the Black liberation movement. And the fact that this performative, transactional allyship that y'all are trying to lobby for is not going to move any of us closer to actual liberation. If unconditional respect for my identity was a factor in whether I was invested in a humanitarian crisis, then as a Black queer woman, I would not align myself with very many Black movements either. I understand gatekeeping our movements from people who only see them as a form of social currency when they don't actually give a fuck about the lives of Black, brown, or queer people, but not another group of marginalized people who are the subject of a genocide that threatens to eradicate them from the earth using brutality that most of us can't even imagine. And if we can stop Gaza from being obliterated alongside the Democratic Republic of Congo, alongside Sudan, then maybe we can prioritize the safety of the queer people that are living in those nations because the nukes are not rainbow colored and they are not spared from violence either.
So a couple weeks ago, I posted a video about this photo. It was of a French-Israeli soldier posting a photo of him with Palestinian women's lingerie clothing behind him, and this was his dating profile picture. That photo is one of many. Haaretz recently posted this article. We're not only here to fuck Hamas. How Israeli militarism took over online dating. Why are Israeli soldiers uploading photos of themselves inside Gazan homes or with Palestinian detainees to their dating profiles? This article is so revealing about the sickness in Israel and the Israeli mindset, and I'm going to just walk you through it. The article begins with saying Israeli dating app users between the ages of 22 to 40 that we have interviewed say that army uniforms and weapons are a hot accessory on dating profiles, and many bios make a direct reference to the ongoing war. It says here in quotations, I feel that girls are throwing themselves at me since I started my reserve duty. After I uploaded photos of myself in uniform, girls seemed more attracted and interested in me. It also gave us a topic of conversation. It builds a lot of tension. I feel that a photo in my uniform is like standing next to a Ferrari. It's a status symbol. But wait, the article continues to get sicker. Shai says he never had as much luck with women as he's having now during the war. Quotations. A friend of mine and I went to a cafe in Tel Aviv in our uniforms a few months ago. A group of girls came up to us and just told us directly that they wanted to sleep with us because we were soldiers. I couldn't believe it, but it happened again after a couple of days. I ended up lying to my commanders that I'm sick.
I rented an apartment with a friend for a week so we could meet up with girls. I'll admit, we would have stayed longer if we didn't have to go back. A social media researcher from Hebrew University of Jerusalem said, they understand that their uniform is a costume, that when you wear it, your stock value rises. It doesn't matter what you look like or what you do in your daily life. This is another confession from an Israeli woman. Something about the mind-body connection with all the anxiety we have during this time makes having sex intimidating. The fact that I hooked up with a reservist reassures me that I'm significant to him. It's kind of an honor to be the girl he hooked up with before he goes back to Gaza. The article continues, nowadays, there is a TikTok trend of soldiers broadcasting from the field showing us what is happening in Gaza or in the West Bank. It's kind of a new form of a thirst trap, but one that is trying to be more authentic. We are so grateful for their sacrifice that we are charmed by them, and more than that, we fetishize them. The article concludes with a professor from Tel Aviv University stating that the image of Hamas terrorists penetrating the southern border and the mass rape and sexual violence they committed were emasculating on a national scale. An act of penetration is perceived as a feminizing act of castration. Therefore, we see Israeli men overcompensating by externalizing their masculinity through acts of aggression and even revenge. It is dehumanizing photos of Palestinians, such as this one, that is being uploaded onto Tinder of Israeli men with their gun and their weapons, blindfolding Palestinians in the most dehumanizing forms, that is arousing Israeli women. Photos of Israeli men holding their weapons as they commit a genocide is being used to boost their ego and their masculinity, to look more like a man. The article basically suggests that Israeli men felt so emasculated after the attacks on October 7th that this portrayal of them posting photos of them dehumanizing Palestinians, of them, posting pictures of Palestinian women lingerie and blindfolding Palestinian men and showing photos of them holding their weapons in Gaza as they commit a genocide. This is all in an effort to boost their masculinity. And what's so fucking crazy is that majority of all the claims against Hamas on October 7th has slowly come out to be fabricated lies. The entire time that I read that article, I couldn't help but to think, imagine if Hamas or a Palestinian or Arab men or a Muslim man did the same thing that these Israeli men are doing on these dating profiles. The Western world would have hung them. They would have killed them all. They would have genocided them. They would have exterminated them. They would have exterminated every single Arab in the Middle East and said that they deserved it because they were savages and predators. The double standards and biases disgust me. It disgusts me. It disgusts me that professors can simply say that Israeli men felt emasculated after October 7th. So it's understandable that they are posting photos like this, that they are documenting their genocide because they're trying to boost their ego. It is disgusting. It is so disgusting. And what's even more disgusting is that slowly every day, the allegations for October 7th somehow slowly become revealed to us that they were fabricated lies. How New York Times and much of the Western media use these lies to galvanize the world into committing this genocide on Palestinians in Gaza. And that genocide continues today.
So they raided P. Diddy's houses the other day. Not investigated, raided. And of course, dudes were coming out of the woodwork talking about how we're all so excited to see the downfall of a man, especially a black man, and how they can't believe we're celebrating a man going to jail. And I just want to say, yes, I am. I am. And I love and fundamentally agree with the ideas of abolishing the prison industrial complex and introducing something closer to like restorative justice. But we're not there yet. It's going to be a very long time. And the people we're going to start with are not going to be P. Diddy and friends. And so what I love to see is not a black man going to jail, because we hate that. But what I love to see is an abuser being held accountable. And y'all love to conflate the two like they're the same, like just because he's black, suddenly he can't also be an abuser. But he is. So yeah, girl, you will catch me celebrating, cheering, doing cartwheels over the fact that these men, these abusive men in these positions of power, are being held to any degree of account. I love to see it, and I will love to see it every single time. the same way that some of y'all will be disgusted with the fact that I am rooting for the downfall of a black man, I will be disgusted that you are rooting for the success of a predator.
I had AI create some songs for a podcast intro theme, and I am absolutely shocked at how passable they are as real music. However, they're interesting to say the least in the directions that they were taken. I will play the music for you, but I want to say if you're a regular follower of mine or if you've seen any videos I've made on AI up until this point, this might not be the intro that you were expecting from me. Wait until the end of the video, okay? I promise. This is going somewhere. So my first prompt was very minimal. I just put in Riot Girl inspired podcast intro theme. Okay, so like obviously it's more pop punk than anything else. I don't know if it actually understands the genre of Riot Girl, but it's very stereotypical, like we're girls and we're rebelling. But my podcast is a movie podcast, so I thought let's see if I can't get it more specific. So the next prompt that I put in was punk rock female movie podcast intro theme, and this is what I got.
Let's make some noise. We're the girls who break the toys. We talk films like nobody else. Welcome to our podcast, let's rebel. From classics to the indie scene, we speak our minds, no filter in between. We're fierce, we're loud, we don't apologize. This is our podcast, get ready for some crash. Talking about movies, not playing by the rules.
Okay, I hate to admit this, but a lot about that works for me. The title of this song is talking about movies not playing by the rules, and I appreciate that they actually talked about the different kinds of movies, you know, the classic movies, indie movies, and, you know, I've got my own unique spin on them. So, like, it's frustratingly good, is what I'm saying. One thing I did find interesting, though, is the very first sentence of the song is, let's make some noise, we're the girls who break the toys, but it's a male singer, presumably because it's punk rock, so that's a male singer, according to AI. Okay, this last one is my favorite, and it's because if my podcast was a Disney Channel original series, this would be the theme. The prompt that I put in was female vocalist punk rock about a woman's film podcast, use lyric, The Broad Perspective. That's the name of my podcast. So they titled the song Broad Perspective, and please enjoy this.
She's got a voice that shakes the patriarchy, raging against the mainstream hypocrisy.
I can't not laugh.
She's got opinions that'll make you think, taking down films with a feminist wink. With a broad perspective, she'll tear it all apart, analyzing movies with a punk rock heart. No more shallow roles or stereotypical BS.
I'm sorry, it's just so funny because it's actually a line of the song, no stereotypical BS. But I mean, this whole song is, I mean, like, it's kind of spot on. Like, they kind of read me, but in a way that is like, it's so awful. So here's the thing. As soon as I heard about the software, which is called Suno, I knew that it was the first AI thing that I wanted to try because I have never done any AI. I've never used ChatGPT. I've never even used any of the AI image generators because I'm very against AI. Because every time I get on this app and say generative AI is bad actually, and it's going to be bad for artists, people in my comments jump in and say, no, it's just a tool. It's just a tool that artists can use. It's going to democratize artistic industries and give power to the people. But why I wanted to try this specific software is because I have a background in art. I have a background in visual arts. I've always like made art and studied it. So maybe I'm not an objective source on those, but I have not a musical bone in my body. I could read music as a kid, but that's, I can't play anymore. I can't even read the fucking music anymore. That ship is sailed. And it took me all of 30 seconds to put in a few words and get a fully produced song. The jobs that AI creates are not only not going to be actually skilled positions, but they're going to take this vital work that artists can do while they create their own artistry. Are they well-produced songs? I would argue not necessarily. They're not even necessarily what I was looking for, but they're passable. They're in a pinch. Absolutely, executives will use this instead of hiring actual musicians to make background music or music for video games or mood music for TV shows or podcast intros, literally anything. And this is what artists have been trying to tell people, is that this is going to take industries that employed millions and turn it into a job that takes one unskilled person 5 minutes to do the work that would have taken several people weeks or even months for any given job. And this is going to come for every single industry. This is why people say that we need AI regulation. Anyway, I would love to hire some real musicians to do an intro theme for my podcast that doesn't sound like it belongs in the Lizzie McGuire movie. Like, absolutely no shade. What dreams are made of absolutely slaps. It's not appropriate for this occasion. And I also think that humans should make art. So if you're a talented human and you want to get in touch about that, let me know. What the fuck is happening with Euphoria Season 3? Variety dropped this article today that gave some details of Sam Levinson's plans for some of the characters in Euphoria that apparently were not received super well by HBO and Zendaya. Some really interesting choices, so let's get into it. First of all, apparently the first round of scripts kind of pushed Zendaya to a background character and gave like really fulfilling arcs to Jacob Elordi's character Nate and Sydney Sweeney's character Cassie, which of all the characters in the show to really focus on. I know that those two actors have gotten really big, but they seem like weird choices to me. I personally don't know that I needed to see Nate Jacobs again at all, especially if this time jump was always going to happen. Apparently, it was always planned. It feels a little weird. Feels like it's leaving a ton of... It'd be like if Breaking Bad ended when Walt was on the run, and then they just jumped to the future and was like, well, he worked that all out. He's got a different life now. I mean, I guess you could do time jumps, but it feels like there's a lot of unresolved shit happening. Anyways, apparently Zendaya herself was really not a fan of that. Shocker. And allegedly all of the actors involved in the show are like really committed to seeing this through and continuing to work with Sam Levinson. I guess they're committed to the project. But in the later drafts that Sam Levinson wrote, apparently Zendaya's character Rue was going to be a private detective. Maybe she was a big fan of Veronica Mars. I don't know. Seems like an odd choice for the character of Rue, but, hey, apparently HBO said that it didn't seem to fit the tone of the series, which, yep, yeah, you're right. One thing that struck me as very strange about this article is they mention like the success that the stars of the film have had, and like how that affects their careers and their involvement with this show. And obviously there are talks about different characters and where their character arcs could go. What I find really strange is that Hunter Schafer is not really mentioned in this article at all. And there are no, at least in this article, indication of what the plans would be for her character Jules, which in my opinion is such a vitally important character in the show and has like really remained like the beating heart of the show despite all of the weirdness around every character in season 2. I mean, especially with her special episode that she wrote. It's strange to me because if any character is going to get, more attention in a time jump, in this series, I would think it would be Jules. And admittedly, like the show has like faced some real hurdles. Like the tragic passing of Angus Cloud was like unpredictable. And apparently Sam Levinson has said that, his character was meant to have a large role in the planned third season. And that's, super devastating for many reasons. They also had a producer that suddenly died, I believe last year. That's, so that's really difficult. That's a lot of like uncontrollable things for a production to handle. But ultimately, I feel like this is such a strong case against like a singular writer with a singular vision, because if you have a writer's room, I mean, as putting aside my personal feelings on, a man in his 30s writing, these kinds of teenage characters with these kinds of interactions and the implications of that and the potential blind spots at best that could be at play. Having a single person being in charge of all of this, having full creative control, and then seemingly not even knowing where to go with any of it, I feel like that's a problem that's solved by a writer's room, by a group of people that are committed to telling the story and getting on the same page and figuring out together a meaningful path forward. I feel like a lot of times we see shows go off the rails because of reasons like this, because one person wants to be the sole creator to tell the story by themselves. And sometimes you need help. Sometimes that serves the story the best. Sometimes that's the best way to make art, is in a collaborative fashion. So I don't know. We'll see if Euphoria season 3 even happens. According to this article, everyone is really committed to it. So
I have an ongoing Hunger Games theory that's partially just a crack theory, but also the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that Buttercup is a mutt. And like, it's mostly a joke, right? But also that cat is indestructible. We don't know where Buttercup came from. We do know that Buttercup had the self-preservation to stay out of the line of fire when District 12 was destroyed. But then after the events of Mockingjay, Buttercup somehow ends up back in District 12, and nobody knows how he ended up there. Some people assume that Greasy Sae brought him back to District 12 with her, but it's never explicitly said. He just is there. And how did he get there? As if he walked all the way from District 13 to District 12? There is no way in hell that I believe that's a normal house cat, unless District 13 is like weirdly close to District 12, but I don't think it is. Like, was Buttercup a mutt? No, I don't actually believe Buttercup is a mutt. However, I think if Buttercup was a mutt, it would add a lot of intrigue and mystery to the story. Like, were Jabberjays the only mutts they used for surveillance? Could they have had other mutts that they used for surveillance in the districts that they let die out? Could they have introduced them as pets so people would welcome them into their homes and then the animals could spy on them? Were they made like virtually indestructible? I don't really believe it, but I would not believe it if they said that Buttercup had been a mutt this entire time.
It's been a while since I talked about what I read this week, so let's just do like a quick wrap up of what I read recently. Every time I've tried to film one this month, like something like I either just didn't want to do one or I accidentally deleted all my videos. It's been a minute. I'm not gonna go through everything that I read within like the last like 2 to 3 weeks because that's what a wrap up is for, but I'll just talk about some highlights once I can remember things that I have feelings about. So currently I am reading The Sword of Kaigan. I am 50% through it. This is a buddy read with my friends Hannah and Trey. I got to chapter 16 and it ruined me. I am behind. I was ahead of everyone and like now I'm behind. But that's okay. I'm gonna finish it by the end of the month. Like, it's whatever. I'm having a really good time. I'm filming a vlog on this, so hopefully I like the vlog and then I'll upload it. Then I read Ender's Game, which I don't remember. I don't even know why I read this. Like, I've had it on my shelves for a very long time. Like, when I first got into sci-fi, this is one of the books I picked up because it was very popular. Honestly, I gave this book 2 stars. I didn't really enjoy it. I thought it was kind of silly. Like, these kids are all like minors and they're being put into the military, but then also there's no way that women can be put into the military because we didn't evolution wasn't like with us, which is what the author said. So like evolution was for children joining the military, but it was just impossible for women. I didn't like that. And I also didn't like the fact that like this 9 and 10-year-old decide that they're gonna like take over the world by starting a discussion column. This was silly. I don't know why this is popular. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Then I read The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. Like, literally, I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is one of the coolest fucking books I've ever read. It's literally about the city of New York and how they, each borough is personified, but not just the city of New York, like everywhere. Like, China's personified, Africa's personified, but they have to be born. So you have to, like, come together as one. And so it's about these boroughs who are different people and they have to come together as one to defeat evil. And I just think that it's really cool. And, like, there's so many different types of characters. They're all so many different type of ages. Like, N.K. Jemisin eats. I also read the second book, The City We Made. I didn't like it as much because I didn't think it was, honestly, I think this could have just been a standalone. Like, it was fine by itself. I didn't think it needed a second book, so I kind of was just like, you know. I read Saga. So I actually read volumes 1 through 4, but I only have 2 of them. So I've read Saga volume 1 before. I read it way back in 2019 and I wasn't into sci-fi at the time, so I think it really missed me. And I don't even know what. I just randomly decided that I wanted to pick it up and I did, and I loved it. I gave this one 5 stars and this one 4 stars. Very like space opera. It's about 2 characters who are on either side of the war and they end up falling in love with each other, and this is the story of them trying to have like a baby and also like keep their babies safe. And this is just really fun. I didn't like volume 4. I didn't like what happened in that volume, so I haven't finished it, but I will. And then somehow I ended up reading fantasy. Like, I mean, I always read fantasy, but like I was on a sci-fi kick. I was like, oh, like maybe fantasy just isn't for me right now. I randomly decided I'm gonna start watching House of the Dragon because I'm not gonna lie, I heard there was 2 black girls in it. So I was like, well, I heard there was black girls in it. So I was like, let me tune in. I never watched Game of Thrones. I was like, I'm gonna watch House of the Dragon. Became obsessed with it. So I ended up reading Rise of the Dragon and Fire of the Blood, which is literally the exact same book. Okay, it is the Targaryen history, what House of the Dragon is based off of. And I ended up giving them both 5 stars. Rise of the Dragon is just a more condensed version. So if you just want to know a little bit of the tea, like you want to know a little bit of what's happening, but not too much, Rise of the Dragon is what you want to read. But if you want all of the tea, read Fire and Blood. I personally really like both. I think of them as 2 different stories. Both of them have artwork in it, 2 different types of artwork. Yeah, absolutely fun. And then I started watching Game of Thrones. So I'm currently reading the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is like 3 novellas in one. And then I'm gonna start reading Game of Thrones. I've already read Game of Thrones, like the first book, like way back in like 2019 when I wasn't into fantasy either. I don't know why I was just trying all these genres I wasn't really into. And then I was like, I don't know. But I'm literally so excited. Like, I'm having the time of my life watching Game of Thrones for the first time, so I literally cannot wait to read it. So hopefully by the end of this month, I've reread the first book with a different perspective, and we can get a review on that. But yeah, that is what I've read so far.